The translator bead in Calder Morrow's ear gave a soft chime, and then the door in front of him dissolved into nothing. Not slid open, not swung. Dissolved, the pale alloy panels simply ceased to exist, folded into some dimension his physics degree hadn't prepared him for, and he was left standing in the entrance of the Velhari House of 5 Daughters with his treaty folder pressed against his chest like a man trying to stop a wound. He had been given exactly 3 instructions by Ambassador Hargrove before the shuttle dropped him off alone on the station. Don't touch anything blue. Don't accept food from the left hand. Don't let them smell that you're afraid. He was fairly certain he was failing at all 3. The hall beyond the dissolved door was enormous, the kind of enormous that made human architecture seem apologetic. Columns of living stone, and he meant living. He could see the slow pulse of bioluminescent veins running through the gray rock, rose 60 feet to a ceiling that wasn't a ceiling so much as a contained sky, a dome of pale violet atmosphere lit from within. The floor was polished something, not marble, deeper than marble. The kind of surface that showed you your reflection and made you wonder if the reflection was the real one. A woman stood at the far end of the hall. Then he corrected himself. 5 women stood at the far end of the hall, arranged in a loose arc, and the one at the center was the reason the word woman felt inadequate. She was tall. All the Velhari were tall, he'd read the briefs. But she wore her height the way a hawk wears its wingspan, as though gravity was making a polite exception. Her skin was a deep amber gold, faintly luminous where her bare forearms caught the dome light, and her hair was the color of a stellar nebula, shifting from deep burgundy at the roots to silver white at the tips as though she were slowly, permanently becoming a star. Her eyes, even at this distance, were wrong in the best possible way. Too large, irised in a pale green that caught light and gave none back, set in a face of such mathematical precision that looking at it directly felt like an act requiring permission. She was watching him the way scientists watch a specimen they haven't classified yet. He walked the length of the hall. His footsteps echoed. Hers did not, because she hadn't moved, and she wouldn't, because she was the eldest daughter of Matriarch Sorv of the Velhari Collective, and eldest daughters of matriarchs did not walk toward diplomats. Diplomats walked toward them. He'd read that brief too. He stopped at the appropriate distance, 12 feet, as stipulated in the pre-negotiation protocol, and inclined his head the way Ambassador Hargrove had drilled him on, 1 degree past horizontal, held for 3 seconds and came up slowly. Calder Morrow, he said, Earth Diplomatic Corps. I represent the Terran sovereignty in the matter of the Threshold Treaty. The woman at the center of the arc looked at him for a long moment. Her expression had the particular stillness of someone who had learned to be unreadable before they learned to talk. You are small, she said. Her voice came from somewhere deeper than her chest. Low, clear, with harmonics in it that the translator bead couldn't decode, a second voice, buried inside the first, like an undertone of a song you couldn't name. Ambassador Hargrove was larger. Ambassador Hargrove is ill. He kept his voice even. I'm his replacement. Replacements are lesser copies. Usually, he agreed, not always. The stillness on her face shifted by approximately 3 degrees. He wasn't sure what direction. He filed it under neither good nor bad and waited. I am Zareva, she said, first daughter of House Sorv. The treaty was to be signed with an ambassador. You are not an ambassador. I'm an envoy with full signatory authority. The legal weight is the same. He opened his folder and offered the credentials document, which had been notarized in 6 languages and holographically sealed by the Terran Sovereignty's Secretary General. I can walk you through the authentication chain if you'd like. Zareva did not take the document. Behind her, the 4 other women in the ark were watching him with varying degrees of open fascination. He got the distinct impression they were not accustomed to seeing a human in person. The second eldest, slightly shorter than Zareva, hair more copper than burgundy, a scar along her left jaw that she carried without embarrassment, was watching him with something that looked almost like amusement. The third was younger, her skin a lighter gold, eyes very wide. The fourth and fifth appeared to be twins, identical in their bone structure, with matching expressions of polite skepticism. "My sisters," Zareva said, as though answering a question he hadn't asked. "Havith, Sarai, and the twins Keth and Ve." "It's an honor," he said. "You don't know yet," said the one named Havith. Her voice had a drier quality than Zareva's, a slight curl at the end of sentences. She spoke Terran standard better than Zareva did, with less translation lag. "Whether it's an honor." "You've just arrived." "True," he said. "I'll revise my assessment after the signing." Havith looked at him the way you look at something unexpected, in a place you thought you understood. The negotiations were supposed to take 3 days. They took 11. This was, as far as Calder could determine, entirely normal for the Velhari. They did not experience urgency the way humans did. Their temporal philosophy, which he had read about and not fully believed until he was living inside it, held that agreements made in haste carried the spiritual weight of mist, and dissolved accordingly. Everything worth doing was worth approaching like a river approaching the sea, inevitably, without rushing. He had called Ambassador Hargrove on the second day to report this. "Settle in," Hargrove had said, from his sick bed on the Meridian station. "You're there until they're ready. The Threshold Treaty took the last envoy 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He came back speaking their secondary language and 3 pounds lighter. He also said it was the best 6 weeks of his professional life, which I've never quite understood." A pause. "Don't touch anything blue." He hadn't touched anything blue. The treaty sessions themselves were conducted in the Great Consultation Chamber, a room that was somehow both austere and overwhelming, all pale stone and high air, with a table so long it required microphones at each end. Zareva presided. She was precise, thorough, and almost aggressively fair. She would argue against provisions that favored the Velhari if she thought they were asymmetric in principle, which was both remarkable and professionally maddening, because it meant every session required him to completely reassess his expectations. In the evenings, the Velhari kept a 17-hour day cycle, 2 hours longer than Earth standard. He ate alone in his assigned quarters and went through his notes, and sometimes the lights of the station drifted past the viewport, and he thought about the briefing documents and what they didn't cover. They didn't cover how she looked when she was actually thinking. He'd learned to watch for it, a particular stillness in her hands, which she kept folded on the table during deliberations, and a fractional widening of those green eyes as though she needed to let more light in to process whatever problem had just emerged. He'd seen mathematicians with the same look. He was careful not to think about this too much. On the third day, something happened that wasn't in the briefing documents. He arrived early to the consultation chamber, a habit from 14 years of diplomatic work. The quiet before the proceedings gave him time to organize his thoughts, and found it already occupied, not by staff. By Sarai, the third daughter, sitting alone at the far end of the enormous table with a collection of small objects arranged in front of her in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. She didn't look up immediately when he entered. She was studying the arrangement with the focused attention of someone solving something, her hands hovering over the objects without touching them. When she finally looked up, she didn't appear startled, more as though she'd known he was there and had simply been waiting for a natural stopping point. "You arrived early," she said. "I usually do." "So do I." She looked back at the arrangement. The objects were small, diverse, a polished stone, a piece of folded material, something that looked like a compass needle without a compass. "I think here, before the sessions begin, the room is different when it is empty." He sat down at the near end of the table, at what was technically his assigned position, and looked at the objects. "What are those?" Tools for a reading, she said. Not prophetic, pattern recognition. We call it Velsoreth, the practice of finding the shape of something before it resolves. She paused. I was reading the treaty. The treaty isn't a physical object. No, but the negotiation is. It has a shape. It has a direction it is leaning. She moved one of the objects slightly. It is leaning toward resolution, which is not always the same as being close to it. He thought about that. What's the difference? She looked up at him fully for the first time, and he understood, looking at her, that she was a great deal more precise than her quiet suggested. Resolution is the end state. Leaning toward resolution is the emotional direction. A negotiation can be very close to signing and still not be leaning. It can be far from signing and lean correctly. A pause. This one is leaning correctly, but there is something in the middle of it that hasn't been named yet. He looked at her objects and thought about provisions and annexes and the mineral rights clause in the third annex. Legal or personal? She tilted her head. I hadn't considered those as separate categories in this context. He didn't pursue that. He should not have said it. He was a professional. He picked up his briefing notes and began his pre-session review, and Sarai returned to her Velsoreth, and they sat at opposite ends of an enormous table in the quiet before the day started, and it was, he reflected, oddly comfortable, like sharing a library. On the fifth evening, someone knocked on his door. He opened it to find Havith leaning against the frame with her arms crossed, and an expression that suggested she had been standing there for a while, deciding whether to knock. You eat alone, she said. I do. That's strange. I didn't want to intrude on your family meals. We don't have family meals. We have arguments disguised as meals. She moved into the room without being invited. He stepped back to accommodate her, more out of instinct than decision, and looked around at his notes spread across the workstation and the treaty documents stacked in order of relevance. You're organized, she said. It sounded like an observation more than a compliment. It helps me think. Zareva is also organized. She picked up a document from the top of the nearest stack, scanned it at a speed that seemed faster than human reading, and set it down. She has been reviewing your counterproposals every evening since the second session. She told our mother you were either very well prepared or very good at appearing well prepared, and that she intended to find out which. He wasn't sure how to respond to that. She doesn't say that about most diplomats, Havith added. The last three left without her learning their names. What happened to them? They were easily discouraged. When Zareva challenged them, they yielded on points she hadn't actually required them to yield on. She finds that disappointing. Havith picked up another document, looked at it, set it down. She has not found you disappointing. I'll take it. Havith gave him a sideways look that was, he was almost certain, a Velhari version of a smile. Then she left. The sixth day brought the twins, and it was different from either Sarai or Havith. He found them waiting outside the consultation chamber that morning, standing exactly side by side in a way that was clearly, slightly, a test, to see whether he could tell them apart on sight. He couldn't. He had studied the briefing photographs, and both women had the same bone structure, the same amber gold skin, the same dark copper hair. The difference, he suspected, was behavioral and contextual, and he hadn't had enough context yet. Keth, he said, guessing, pointing to the one on the left. Vey, said the one on the left. Close, said the one on the right. Most don't guess at all. He thought about it. You're holding a document folder. Keth is the practical one. You met us for the first time this morning, Vey said. Havith mentioned it. Both twins looked at each other. It was a look he was learning to read, the Velhari version of a raised eyebrow. She talks to you, Keth said. She came to my quarters on the fifth evening. She ate half my rations and told me things I probably wasn't supposed to know. She does that, Vey said. She has decided you are trustworthy. That's the highest compliment she gives, Keth said. Havith doesn't trust, she assesses. You have been assessed. I'll try to be worth the assessment. You already are, Keth said, with the flat certainty of someone reporting a fact. She wouldn't have gone if you weren't. They flanked him as he walked into the chamber, and it occurred to him that each of the 5 daughters was making their own determination about him, independently, for reasons that had nothing to do with the treaty. He filed this under important and kept it there. On the 8th day, Zareva challenged him on the mineral rights clause in the 3rd Annex. She argued that the human phrasing created an ambiguity that could, under Velhari contract law, be interpreted to grant Terran mining operations sovereignty over inhabited moons. This was, he confirmed after 20 minutes of furious cross-referencing, technically correct under a very specific reading of Velhari jurisprudence from approximately 800 years ago. That's a fair point, he said. Zareva stopped. He'd learned by then that she had a tell when she was genuinely surprised. A micro-pause, nearly invisible, as though she had loaded an expected response, and the system had returned an error. I said that's a fair point, he repeated. The clause is ambiguous, I'll redraft it. He was already writing. Something like, extraction rights apply exclusively to uninhabited geological formations, with inhabited classification defined jointly by both parties. Does that resolve it? Another pause shorter. It does, she said. Good, what's next? She looked at him for 3 seconds. He counted. Then she went to the next provision. But at the end of that session, when the other advisors and her sisters had filed out, she remained seated while he gathered his documents. He almost didn't notice until he straightened up and found her still there, her hands folded on the table, watching him. You conceded that without negotiating, she said. You were right, what would I negotiate? Every other human envoy we have dealt with has attempted to find a counterargument, even when none existed. He shrugged. Seems like a waste of your time and mine. The fractional eye widening. Then, why does Earth want this treaty? It wasn't a provision question. It was a real question. He sat back down. Because, he said, there's a stretch of 11 star systems between Terran space and the Velhari Collective, and right now there are no agreements, no protocols, and no emergency procedures governing what happens if something goes wrong out there. Shipping lanes, debris, a stranded crew, a misread sensor signature that looks like a weapons test, these things happen. Without a treaty framework, they can become incidents. With one, they're paperwork. We want them to be paperwork. Zareva was quiet for a moment. Then, most human envoys cite economic benefit. That's also true, but it's not the first reason. What is the first reason? He hesitated for a moment that he hoped was invisible. My father's cargo hauler got stranded in unclaimed space when I was 12. No agreements, no jurisdiction, no emergency relay. It took 9 days for another Terran ship to find him. He was fine. But 9 days is a long time for a 12-year-old. He closed his folder. I've been in this work for 14 years and I have never once forgotten that 9 days. Zareva looked at him for a very long time. Long enough that he became aware of the size of the room again, the way the dome filtered light, the pulse in the living stone columns. My mother, she said finally, lost her navigator to a border incident 20 years ago. A Terran vessel and a Velhari patrol drone, a misread sensor signature. A pause. He was her bond partner. The silence between them was different after that, not uncomfortable. More like a shared room they'd both been in separately, and just realized it. I'm sorry, he said. She has accepted it, but she wants this treaty signed for the same reason you do, paperwork, a beat. A Velhari word for the same impulse, care of Saul, approximately, the work that stops grief from repeating. That's a better word than paperwork. Your language has many limitations, but there was something in her voice when she said it that wasn't criticism. He stood up, picked up his folder. Same time tomorrow. Same time tomorrow, she said. He was 3 steps toward the door when she spoke again. Calder Morrow. He turned. She was still seated, still composed, but there was something different in her face. It was almost tentative, which was the last word he would have predicted applying to her. You spoke your father's name as though it mattered more than the policy, she said. Most diplomats do not do that. Most diplomats haven't been 12. A beat, no, she said. I suppose not. He left. He was absolutely, categorically, and very carefully not thinking about any of this in a personal way. He was a treaty envoy. She was the first daughter of a matriarch. He was here to sign a document and get back on the shuttle. There was a word for what he was very deliberately not doing, and it was professional. He was exceptionally professional. Then came the evening of the 9th day, and the dinner changed everything. It was not an invitation to a family meal. The formal term, which Haveth delivered with the approximate gravity of someone announcing a state occasion, was the Velhari deliberation feast, a tradition that occurred when negotiations crossed the 8-session threshold, signifying that the talks had passed from procedural necessity into genuine mutual consideration. Attendance was not optional. Refusal was a legal term in Velhari diplomatic code, carrying specific implications about the refusing party's intentions that Calder would rather not have attached to the Terran sovereignty. He went. The feast table was set in a courtyard open to the station's simulated sky. The Velhari maintained an atmosphere dome of extraordinary sophistication, and the ceiling above the courtyard was cycling through a sunset that was deep red and amber and utterly alien, the light of a sun 4 systems away. Translated by some technology he didn't have security clearance to ask about. He sat where he was placed, which was at the table's right-hand position of honor, a position that, he knew from the briefing documents, was reserved for those the host considered neither a subordinate nor an equal, but something more specific, a peer being evaluated. The matriarch herself was present. He had not met her before. Sorv was not what the briefing documents had prepared him for. The documents described her as the supreme political authority of the Velhari collective, which she clearly was. They did not describe the way she sat in her chair as though the chair had been placed around her, or the quality of attention she turned on him when Zareva introduced him, a complete and total assessment, like being read in full by someone who skimmed nothing. Calder Morrow, the matriarch said, her Terran standard was accented but faultless. My daughter says you are honest. I try to be. She says it as though it surprises her. I get that a lot, he said. The matriarch smiled. It rearranged her face entirely for approximately 2 seconds, and then it was gone. The meal proceeded. The Velhari feast tradition involved multiple courses, each one introduced with a brief statement about its origin, the animal, the region, the method of preparation. He listened carefully and ate everything offered with his right hand, as protocol dictated, and asked questions when they seemed appropriate, and answered questions when they were asked. There were many questions. The matriarch led them, but all 5 daughters participated, and the questions were not diplomatic small talk. They were the kind of questions people ask when they are genuinely trying to understand something. About Earth, about humans, about what it was like to come from a planet with only 1 moon. This required more explanation than he expected. The Velhari had 16. About whether it was true that humans slept 8 hours out of every 24, and how they functioned given such enormous inefficiency. About whether he had family, which led to a conversation about his sister on Earth who was an engineer and his mother who was retired and his father who was, yes, still hauling cargo. He still flies, the matriarch asked. He says if he stops flying he'll forget who he is. A practical man. He says the same thing about himself. Something shifted in the matriarch's face. He couldn't name it. She looked at Zareva briefly, and Zareva was looking at her hands, and then the conversation moved. About the comet mark, and the evening shifted. It was Sarai, the third daughter, who asked about it. She had been the quietest through most of the meal, but she had been watching him since the feast began with an expression he was starting to recognize as the Velhari version of intense curiosity. "You have a mark," she said, pointing at his left collarbone, where the collar of his formal shirt left a V-shaped gap. There was indeed a mark there, a small, irregular birthmark, dark reddish-brown, shaped roughly like a comet or a curving slash. He'd had it since birth. "I do," he said, "a birthmark." The table went quiet, not an uncomfortable quiet, a significant one. He looked around, uncertain. The matriarch was watching him with an expression he couldn't interpret. Zarava's hands, which had been folded loosely on the table, had gone still in a different way than her thinking stillness. And Havith was looking at her mother with something he would have called alarm on a human face. "It is," the matriarch said slowly, "the shape of the navigator's mark." "I'm sorry." The matriarch looked at Zarava. Some communication passed between them that required no words, the way only decades of mother-daughter fluency could. "Our navigator," Zarava said carefully, "who died in the border incident I described. He carried a mark of that shape. It is considered in our tradition to indicate a soul that crosses between fates. That touches other lives and changes them. That appears at the threshold of something larger than itself." She paused. "We do not attribute it to superstition. We attribute it to pattern recognition." He didn't know what to do with that. He kept his face neutral and said, "I haven't changed anyone's fate today that I know of." "You are changing this treaty," the matriarch said quietly. "That changes things that will happen. That changes things that will not happen." Her eyes, the same green as Zarava's, older, deeper, rested on him steadily. "The care of Saul you spoke of, the work that stops grief from repeating, my bond partner would have said the same thing." He became very carefully quiet and let the moment sit without trying to fill it. After the feast, after the matriarch had retired and the station's simulated sky had cycled to deep purple-black with alien constellations he still hadn't learned, he was sitting in the courtyard while the staff cleared the last of the table. He was looking at his own left collarbone for probably the third time in 10 minutes, which felt slightly absurd, when Havith appeared beside him and sat down without asking. "You're confused," she said. "A little." "Our mother does not do that lightly. The navigator's mark reference. She has not spoken of it since Renav died." A pause. "Renav was his name." "I know," he hesitated. "I'm sorry if it was painful." "It was necessary. Something my mother has been waiting to feel since then. Some permission to let the grief be worth something. I think it moved." Havith was quiet for a moment. "Zarava has been looking at that mark on your neck since the 4th day of negotiations." He said nothing. "My sister," Havith said, in a tone that was doing significant work trying to sound casual, "does not notice physical things about diplomats. She's thorough. She probably noticed it as a potential identification marker in case." "Calder," Havith's voice was dry as desert stone, "I am telling you something." He was quiet. "She also," Havith said, "argued with our mother for 2 hours on the evening of the 7th day about whether Terran Velhari bonds were legally recognized under the collective statutes. She did not explain why she was asking." He looked at his hands. They were steady because he was a professional. "Havith," he said. "Yes. I like your sister very much." He chose the words with care. "She is the most precise, honest person I have met in 14 years of diplomatic work, and I am here to sign a treaty." "Those two things," Havith said, "are not in conflict. She is the first daughter of a matriarch. I am a temporary envoy from a species you'd never met in person until 11 days ago. Our bonds," Havith said patiently, "are not determined by rank or species. They are determined by the briefing documents you were given probably do not cover this, so I will tell you directly by resonance. A quality of attention, of recognition." She paused. My sister looks at you the way she looks at a proof she has finally solved." He didn't have anything to say to that. He was very quiet for a long time. The alien constellations moved slowly overhead, the way all stars move when you have enough patience to watch. "What would I do?" he said finally. "With that information, I go home when the treaty is signed." "Do you?" He opened his mouth, closed it. The 10th day was the quietest session of all. They were working through the final provisions, the implementation procedures, the review clauses, the amendment protocols, and most of the real work had already been done. It was the paperwork stage of the paperwork, and they both knew it, and there was something in the knowledge that made the day feel different, heavier. He kept catching himself looking at the table rather than at her. She caught him once. Not during the session. During a short recess, when he had stepped away to the alcove at the side of the chamber where refreshments had been laid out, and he was standing with his water glass looking at the living stone column nearest to him, watching the bioluminescent pulse. It moved like a slow heartbeat. He had looked at those columns every day for 10 days, and today was the first day he found it genuinely beautiful rather than architecturally notable. He became aware that she had followed him to the alcove and was standing 3 feet to his left. "The columns," she said, "you are looking at them. I've looked at them every day. Today it's different." She was quiet for a moment. It is the Velsorith principle. When something is nearly resolved, you begin to see it as it is instead of as what you need from it. "Is that what's happening?" "I think so." A pause. "I am told Havith came to your quarters on the 5th evening." "She did." "And Sarai spoke with you before the morning sessions." "She did." "And the twins intercepted you on the 6th day." "Ambushed is closer." Zareva was quiet for a moment. There was something in the set of her shoulders, a fraction more contained than usual, that he had learned to read as the Velhari equivalent of someone taking a breath before saying something they'd been managing. "My sisters," she said carefully, "have each formed independent opinions about you." "I gathered." They are not usually forthcoming with diplomats, or strangers, or most people." Another pause. "They are forthcoming with very few people, and those few are people they have decided are," she stopped, found the word. "Safe." That is not a small word in our culture. It carries more weight than in yours. "I know it carries weight," he said. "I take it seriously." She looked at him, the pale green eyes level and precise. "I know you do," she said. "That is why they did it." He held her gaze and let himself, very carefully, not look away. The treaty was signed on the 11th day. It was signed with a formality that had clearly been planned. The chamber arranged differently, the full household staff and advisors present, the matriarch herself at the head of the table. He signed with the stylus he'd brought from Earth, and Zareva signed with a crystal instrument that left an inscription in the treaty document not as ink, but as changed molecular structure, the letters permanently part of the paper itself. Terran witnesses on one side, Velhari on the other, the whole thing recorded and transmitted simultaneously to the Terran Sovereignty's archive, and whatever the Velhari called their equivalent. When it was done, the matriarch said, "Kerv Sal." "It is done." There was a Velhari term of response, the closest equivalent to Amen, a single syllable that every Velhari in the room said at the same time. He said it too, because Havith had told him to learn it for exactly this moment, and the matriarch looked at him with the same 2-second smile. Then it was over, and everyone filed out, and he was standing in the consultation chamber with his signed treaty folder and his return transit authorization, and a shuttle scheduled for 6 hours from now. And Zareva was on the other side of the room gathering her own documents, and he needed to pick up his folder and go back to his quarters and pack, and not make an enormous professional mistake. He picked up his folder. Calder Morrow. He turned. She was looking at him with the full weight of those green eyes, and there was something in her face that he recognized because he'd been very carefully not letting himself recognize it for days. It was there anyway, mathematics clear and steady. "The treaty is signed," she said. "It is. You leave in 6 hours." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Haveth told me she spoke to you last night. She is not subtle." "No." She was also, Zareva said carefully, "not wrong." He was very still. "A Velhari bond," she said, and the word in her language had harmonics that the translator bead rendered as the sum of everything the word implied, recognized, chosen, witnessed, permanent, is not a casual declaration. It is also not a fast one. There are protocols. There would need to be conversations, legal consultations, the kind of paperwork that Kervsal requires. A pause. "I am telling you this so that you do not think I am speaking without consideration." "You don't do anything without consideration." "No," a beat. "I'm also telling you so that you understand if you returned, after, if you found reason to," she stopped, started again. "The shuttle schedule is not fixed. Ambassador Hargrove is still ill. The matriarch has indicated that an extended diplomatic presence would be acceptable while the treaty implementation procedures are established." He took a breath. "Are you asking me," he said slowly, "if I want to stay?" "I am indicating," she said, "that the option exists." He almost laughed. She noticed, and the 3-degree expression shift happened, not displeasure. He'd learned that now, something more like curiosity about the laughter. "I would like to stay," he said, "if the Velhari House of Sorv will have me." "The House of Sorv will," she stopped again, set her documents down, "yes." And then, because he was human and humans sometimes did things that didn't follow protocol, he crossed the 12 feet between them in 4 steps and offered his hand. Not a handshake, just his hand, open, upward, the way you offer something you don't expect to be taken but want to make available. She looked at it. Then she placed her own hand over it, her palm warm and slightly luminous where the dome light hit the gold of her skin, her fingers longer than his by a precise joint and a half, and the contact was so careful it was almost not contact, and more complete than any contact he'd had in 14 years. She did not say anything. She didn't have to. Then the door behind him opened, and 4 voices arrived simultaneously. She said yes, Haveth, triumphant and trying to sound like she hadn't been listening outside. She asked first, technically, one of the twins. "I told you the mark mattered." Sarai, with the serene vindication of someone who had been saying something for days and was not going to miss the moment. "Does this mean he stays for the implementation period or permanently?" The other twin, practical. Zareva turned to look at her sisters with an expression he now had a name for. The full-scale version of the expression she'd been managing in 3-degree increments for 11 days. She said something in Velhari that the translator bead rendered, imperfectly, as something between "I cannot believe you" and "of course you're all here." Then she looked at him. "My sisters," she said, with the careful composure of someone managing both dignity and familial chaos simultaneously, "are interested in your decision." I noticed. "They are also," she stopped. Her composure shifted by about 15 degrees, which was the most he'd ever seen it move. "They are also apparently under the impression." She said something in Velhari directed at Haveth, who replied at length, gesturing. A short and intense exchange followed between all 5 of them. He waited. Finally, Zareva turned back to him. There was something on her face he had not seen there before. It took him a moment to identify it because he'd never expected to see it on her face. She was embarrassed. "Human," she said, which was the first time she had called him that instead of his name, and the harmonics in her voice were doing a great deal of work. "There is something I should perhaps explain about Velhari bond traditions." "Okay," he said. "A bond declared by the first daughter of a house," she said very carefully, carries implications for the house as a whole, not just the first daughter. He was quiet. Our bond tradition, she continued, recognizes that the one chosen by the eldest carries a quality, the resonance I described, that is not exclusive, that a soul of sufficient depth, of sufficient recognition, does not bond only with one member of a family but with the family's pattern, with the thread of it. He looked at her, then at the four sisters in the doorway, then back at her. "Zareva," he said. "Yes. Are you saying?" "I am saying," she said, with the composure of someone who has decided that if they are going to say something that sounds impossible they will say it with full precision, that my sisters have collectively and separately reached the conclusion that the bond is not exclusive to me. Dead silence. "Haveth broke it, we have discussed it. Among ourselves," Sorai added helpfully, "for several days." "We both agreed," said Keth. Vey nodded. He stood in the middle of the most significant diplomatic chamber on the Velhari station, holding the hand of the first daughter of the House of Sorv, and looked at all five of them. He said, "I need to be very clear about what I'm hearing." "We are the House of 5 daughters," Haveth said, with the precision of someone reading from a legal document she had written herself. "There is no direct precedent for what we are proposing. However, there is also no law specifically." "Haveth," Zareva said. "I'm being accurate. You are being catastrophic. The two are not mutually exclusive." Sorai stepped forward from the group, which was the first time she had voluntarily moved toward him in 11 days. She stopped at approximately 9 feet, 3 feet inside the 12-foot protocol distance, and looked at him with those wide, very earnest eyes. "The tradition," she said quietly, "is not what Haveth is making it sound like. It is not a demand. We are not," she searched for the word. "It is more like, have you ever felt recognized, not seen, recognized, as though someone looked at you and understood the specific shape of what you are and found it." She stopped. "Haveth, what is the Terran word?" "There isn't one, that's the problem," Haveth said. "There's a close one," he said. Everyone looked at him. "Seen," he said. "Or maybe known," he paused. "Or maybe the German word which translates roughly as the person you feel you have met before even when you haven't, Vertraut, familiar in the root sense, like home." Sorai looked at him for a moment. Then she turned to Zareva and said something in Velhari. "She says you understand," Zareva said quietly. "I think I do," he took a breath, "but I think I need everyone to understand something about humans." All 5 of them were quiet. The hum of the station around them, the slow pulse of the living stone columns, the distant breathwork of the dome, and then silence around that, waiting. "When I crossed the room just now," he said, "and offered Zareva my hand, that was the most honest thing I've done in the last 11 days. Not the treaty as much as I'm proud of it, that." He looked at Zareva, then at the sisters. "I am one person. I don't know your traditions the way you know them. I don't know what resonance means across 5 people who are all extraordinary in different ways." He looked at Haveth. "Haveth, who is sharper than any diplomat I've met in 2 seconds of conversation." He looked at Sorai. "Sorai, who reads the shape of things before they resolve and was telling me something true from the 3rd day, and I was too busy being careful to hear it." He looked at the twins. "Keth, who is practical and filed me as trustworthy before I'd said 10 words to her. Vey, who is patient, and has probably been watching all of this like someone reading a novel she already knows the ending of." "I had some guesses," Vey said calmly. "And Zareva," he said, and he didn't add anything to that because there was nothing adequate to add. "Who is," he stopped. "Let it stand." "I am one human," he said. "I don't have 5 of me." Zareva's mouth curved. It was not the matriarch's 2-second rearrangement of a face. It was smaller, more internal, like a light coming on somewhere behind the composed surface. He had not seen it before, and he understood immediately and with complete certainty that very few people had. "We are not asking for 5 of you," she said. "We are saying," she stopped, tried again. "Calder, what is the ocean?" He blinked. "What?" "The ocean, what is it?" He thought about it. "Aggregated," he said slowly. "A whole made of," he stopped, "of drops." She nodded. "Once precisely. What is an ocean but a multitude of drops?" He stood there for a moment with that. Then Haveth said, from the doorway, "She has been saving that line for 2 days. We know this because she tried it on us and we thought it was beautiful and she was afraid it wouldn't work on you." "Haveth," Zareva said, with the tone of someone who loves their sister deeply and is very tired. "I'm establishing context." "You are establishing humiliation." "Nuance." He laughed. He couldn't help it. It was the laugh of a man who had been professionally composed for 11 days and had just discovered that the 5 most extraordinary women he'd ever met were, beneath all the ceremony and the bone-deep strangeness and the luminous alien dignity, a family. A messy, loving, talking over each other family who had spent 2 days workshopping a line because the eldest was nervous, and none of them had said so directly because they were too proud to admit they were hoping. The laugh surprised all 5 of them. And then, one by one, Haveth first with her dry expression cracking into something real, then Sarai with her sudden genuine delight, then the twins in unison, and finally Zareva last and most carefully, like something coming open that had been closed for a very long time. They laughed too. It sounded like 5 different songs in the same key. He realized he was still holding Zareva's hand. He had not let go, and she had not pulled away. "I am not," he said when it settled, "going to pretend I understand all of this. I'm not going to pretend I know what it means or what it looks like going forward or what." He gestured, inadequately, at the space between himself and the 5 of them. "What the structure is." "Neither do we," Haveth said. "There is no exact precedent." "We told you." "Right so," he took a breath. "Then I guess we do the Kervsal thing." All 5 of them looked at him. "The work," he said. "The long, careful, deliberate work of figuring it out, like a treaty." He looked at Zareva. "Provisions negotiated honestly, both sides heard, amendments allowed, reviewed at regular intervals to make sure it's still working." "That is," Zareva said slowly, "the most diplomatic description of." "I know what I'm doing for a living," he said. "I'm good at it." "You are," she said. And the simplicity of it, not a compliment, a fact, delivered without ornament, was the most intimate thing she'd said to him in 11 days. "You would need," she said, "to speak with our mother." "I'd be honored to." "She will ask you many questions." "She's been asking me questions since the feast. I didn't mind." "These will be different questions." "I know," he paused. "I'll answer them honestly." "I know," she said. "That is why I am not afraid of you asking." A pause. "The implementation period for the treaty is 18 months. Hargrove is still ill." "Yes." 18 months, he said. "That's enough time to learn your secondary language. The last envoy managed it in 6 weeks. The last envoy," Haveth said from the doorway, "did not have 5 daughters of the house helping him study." He looked at her. "That's true. It will go faster." "Probably." Vey said, "I have already drafted a study schedule." "Of course you have." "I am the practical one," Vey said without apology. "The schedule," Keth added, "accounts for the fact that you will likely need more repetition on the tonal markers than on the grammar. Your grammar intuition is already reasonable. We assessed it from your sentence structure in the formal sessions." He stared at her. "You analyzed my sentence structure." "We were curious," Keth said. "We began analyzing it on the 2nd day." "We had a small disagreement," Vey said. "I thought your tonal range was deliberately narrow. Keth thought it was cultural. We concluded it was both." He opened his mouth, closed it. You'll get used to them, Haveth said. Or you won't, but you'll learn to enjoy it either way. Sorai looked up at him with her wide, earnest eyes and said, You will learn to love the 17-hour day. The extra 2 hours are the best part. What happens in the extra 2 hours? Stories, she said. We tell stories. Every evening in the last 2 hours before sleep. Our mother began the tradition when we were children. We have told the same stories and new ones and invented ones and ones that are partway between, and we have never in 40 years missed an evening. He thought about that. A family every evening for 40 years telling stories to each other. The same ones worn smooth with use. New ones rough-edged and finding their shape. The space between finished and beginning. I don't know any Velhari stories, he said. You will learn them, Sarai said. And you know human ones, we would like to hear those. We have questions, Keth said, about Earth mythology and your ocean. You mentioned once that it covers most of the planet. 70%, he said. A multitude of drops, Sarai said quietly. The simulated sky above the courtyard, beyond the chamber, had cycled back to the amber-red sunset of the alien sun, the one that turned everything in the dome the color of embers. And he stood in it, holding the hand of a woman who had looked at him like a proof being solved and thought about his father 9 days adrift in unclaimed space, about a navigator named Renav, and a matriarch who had been waiting for something to make the grief worth something, about comet-shaped birthmarks and souls that appeared at thresholds, about the way all things that matter begin the same way, not with certainty, but with the willingness to stay. The matriarch was waiting in the outer hall when they emerged, all 5 of her daughters and 1 human diplomat walking out of the consultation chamber together. She looked at him, the full, complete assessment of the feast table, but different now. Something had resolved in it. Calder Morrow, she said. Matriarch Sorv. You did not touch anything blue. He almost smiled. I was careful. You were also, she said slowly, careful with my daughters, with my eldest. She was quiet for a moment. Renav was a careful man. I do not say that as coincidence. I say it as observation. She looked down at his collarbone where the birthmark sat below his collar and then back up at his face. The care of Saul between our peoples will require time, patience, work that does not always feel like progress. I know. You understand this not as a diplomatic principle, but as a personal one. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. You will need to file an amended mission extension with the Terran sovereignty. The grounds can be treaty implementation. A pause. Tell them it is more complicated than expected. That is, in fact, accurate. It's extremely accurate, he said. Another moment. Then she said something in Velhari, low, not for translation, a single sentence, and Zareva beside him went very still for a moment and then inclined her head. What did she say? He asked quietly. Zareva took a moment. She said the thread holds. He looked at the matriarch. She nodded once precisely. Then she said, I will expect you at the story hour this evening. We begin 2 hours before the night cycle ends. Haveth will show you where we gather. I'll be there, he said. You will not understand most of what is said for the first several weeks. I know. You will stay anyway. Yes. She looked at him one more time, the full reading. Then she did something he had not seen her do with anyone else in all the formal proceedings of 11 days. She inclined her own head, 1 degree past horizontal, held it 3 seconds. The same greeting protocol he had used, turned back toward him. Appear being recognized. He returned it. Then she turned and walked away down the hall, and the living stone columns pulsed their slow, bioluminescent rhythm around them. And the 5 daughters of the House of Sorv stood with him in the amber-red light of a foreign sun. And it occurred to him, with the particular clarity of moments that you know, even as they happen, that you will carry for the rest of your life, that he had arrived here to sign a document. He had not known, stepping off the shuttle, that you could arrive at one place and find yourself somewhere else entirely. That you could do the work of preventing grief from repeating and discover, in the middle of it, that something was beginning instead of ending. The translation bead chimed softly in his ear. The shuttle's schedule updating. Ambassador Hargrove's recovery projected at 4 more weeks. Extended mission authorized. Havith read it over his shoulder without apology. 4 weeks. It's a start, he said. 18 months, Keth said. Minimum, Vey agreed. Sorai looked up at him and said, I will teach you the Velsorith practice, for reading the shape of things. It will help with the language acquisition, I think. It helps to understand what a word is reaching for before you know what it means. I'd like that, he said. She nodded, with the quiet certainty of someone who had known this was coming for at least a week. Havith said, I have a list of everything you said in the formal sessions that was technically correct but culturally wrong. It is a long list. We will go through it. I appreciate the honesty. You should. Most people find it annoying. I find it useful. I know, she said. That's why I made the list. He looked at all of them. At the dome above, cycling its foreign sun. At the living stone and the signed treaty under his arm and the woman beside him whose hand was no longer in his but who was standing close enough that the warmth of her was distinct, specific, and entirely intentional. He thought about drops and oceans, about threads that hold, about the work that stops grief from repeating and the other work. The longer, stranger, more patient work of building something where there was nothing before. Then I guess, he said, I have some catching up to do. Havith made a sound that was, he had learned over 11 days to recognize, her version of a laugh. A great deal of catching up, she confirmed. We will help, Sorai said. We will supervise, Keth said. I will optimize the process, Vey said. And Zarava, standing in the amber light with the certainty of someone who has solved something she did not expect to solve and found the answer better than the proof, said nothing at all. She simply turned and walked toward the inner hall, and after exactly 3 steps she looked back over her shoulder. A single, brief look, the green of her eyes catching light in that particular way that gave nothing back, and that was enough. He followed. 4 sisters came after, already talking.